Hello, Garland Nixon here. And when it comes to Ukraine, there's a lot of talk about a timetable. How long does this thing go on? Let's talk. Hello, all. And I think we need to talk about a timetable here for Ukraine because that is a big discussion. Everybody's trying to figure out what's going to happen when. Will the let me add a little bit of kill, a little bit of headroom. Will the Are the Russians about to do some kind of a big, hammer and in this thing? Is it going to go on forever? Is it going to drag on? Will the NATO troops come in? What does the timetable look like here? Well, let's start here and let's look at. Here's the way I look at it. One of the reasons I say it's important to look at as many different outlets as possible is that you want to understand what people are thinking, where they're coming from. What we're taught in America is don't read the other side, don't read the other guy stuff, only read our stuff. And you'll know the truth. The other guys, all lies and propaganda. Why, when you go to CNN and they march and MSNBC and Fox, and they march a general over that they don't, across the stage, and they don't tell you that that person is on the board of directors of one of the military industrial contractors, that person's going to tell you the truth. And of course, then they're going to bring in a retired CIA chief, NSA chief, FBI, DOJ, you name it. They're all going to give us the truth. So you wouldn't want to go anywhere else because we got to get the truth from our former intelligence operatives. All right. Let's Garland and you, me and Garland, speaking for you, are going to look at some alternative things and see what we can come up with. Let's start well, maybe we can answer some questions. Maybe if we figure out what the Russians are thinking, we'll get some ideas. Let's start here. Well, there's a talk about they're going to send long-range weapons. What are the Russians going to do? Again, isn't it important to read RT? What do you know? What are the Russians saying? Russia outlines response if Ukraine gets longer range weapons. This is simple. The greater Kiev's capabilities become, the further its troops will be pushed back, right? How logical is that? How practical is that? You're trying to figure out their response. Well, if they can hit us from 10 miles, we'll need to push them back 10 more miles. If they can hit us from 300 miles, we'll need to push them back 300 miles. Ukrainian forces will be pushed further back from Russian territories in response to the West's decision to provide Kiev with longer range missiles, Foreign Ministry Sergei Lavrov said. That's why it's important to read Russian stuff. That's logical. It makes sense. And I would argue, a person who has studied Russian culture and Russian stuff, it's very Russian. The Russians tend to be very practical, logical people. As a society, it's part of their culture, and it makes sense. All they're saying is, you know what? You're only making it harder on the Ukrainians. We got to push them back. We got to take a certain amount of Ukraine for our Russian-speaking people to be safe. And if they need another 300 miles to where you can't hit them, we'll take that other 300. If they need another 500, we'll take that other 500. We will create the cushion that we need to keep our people safe, to keep our country safe. Now that they've annexed a part of Ukraine, they've said, we'll take what we need to take to keep ourselves safe. If you want to do that, you let your conscience be your guide, right? And they say, now our goal is to push the artillery of the Ukrainian armed forces back to a distance where they would not create a threat to our territories. The longer range the weapons supplied to Kiev regime have, the further the troops will need to be moved. You know what? That's why they don't want you to read RT or TASS or Global Times or Press TV, which the Iranians. That's why. Because if you read, you'll read it and you'll say, well, they told me these people are crazy, madmen, insane. That doesn't sound crazy. It sounds kind of what you would expect a country to say in times of military conflict. So, for those who had questions that said, oh my gosh, we might send them longer range weapons. I guess they're going to attack Poland. They're going to nuke us. Oh no, we're doomed. Nah, the Russians aren't stupid. They don't want to die in a nuclear holocaust any more than anybody else. So they're pretty simple. Look, a couple more 100 miles ain't nothing to us. If you want to give up a couple 100 miles, we're here to take it. Now, let's move to the next thing. We got questions that need to be asked. One of them is about time. Let's look at that. And this is important. How about this? How, not when. This is TASS, Russian news agency. Lavrov lays out Russia's priorities for ending Ukraine crisis. So the Americans are like, what's going to happen? When's this going to end? You know what I do? If I want to know what the Chinese are thinking, I go to Net. I go to Global Times. I look for Chinese news outlets. If I want to know what the Iranians are thinking, I go to Press TV. That's why they kind of try to block that stuff. They don't want you to know. This is not rocket science here. I'm not like, some genius political analyst. I just read stuff and it's kind of obvious and you can put it together. So let's go. Everybody's seeking the end to the conflict in Ukraine. Now, isn't that always the discussion? When's it going to end? When is it going to end? When's this thing going to end? Oh my God, will it last forever? You go to TASS and they tell you what they're thinking. Everybody's seeking to end the conflict in Ukraine, but the quality of any outcome, not time frames, is what matters to the Russian people, Moscow's top diplomat Sergei Lavrov said in an interview. All of us want this to be over, but what matters here is not the timing, but the essence and quality of the outcome that we could secure for our nation, for those people who want to remain part of Russian culture, who have for years been deprived of all things Russians by the Kiev junta with Western connivance, he maintained. Hey, agree, don't agree, like it or don't like it. Now, if you want to know how the Russians view their timeline, you now know. We got an outcome that we want. We don't care how long it takes. We're not concerned about the time. We're getting that out done. The more efficient we are in explaining what's going on in terms of geopolitical games, the faster the world will realize, perhaps, that we should be done with it. And we should be done with it as soon as we see the U.S.-led West drop its stubborn insistence to keep this conflict simmering until they decide that any threat to their hegemony has been removed. So you see what they're saying? Hey, man, you guys want to keep pushing this thing and you feel that somebody's threatening your ability to run the world. Look, we're going to explain what we're doing. Currently, we are working toward a pledge our Western economy. This is important. This tells you something. People are like, will the Russians talk? Will the Russians work out a diplomatic deal? Here's what they say. Currently, we are working toward a pledge our Western counterparts have made. Winning on the battlefield. That is their formula. In fact, I forgot, it might have been Jens Stoltenberg or one of them that said that there won't be diplomacy. This will be won on the battlefield. So now the Sergei Lavrov says, you guys said it's got to be won on that battlefield. That's what we're trying to do. That is their formula. And they were the ones who refused to negotiate since they forced the Kiev regime to abandon negotiations in late March, precisely when it was still possible to find a political solution to this, Russian top diplomat concluded. Now, I would simply say this. You may agree with him. You may not agree with him. You may think he's right. You may think he's wrong. But it makes sense, doesn't it, to listen to what he has to say and to take that information in so you can use that to evaluate how things are working out. You listen to the Americans, you listen to the EU and the NATO people, you listen to the Russians, you get all sides. Do not just be like, well, we can't listen to the Russians. We got to listen to all of our side. This is the way I always put it. This is the way I put it. You have 12 jurors. Use something I'm familiar with. You got 12 jurors. 4 of the jurors listen to the prosecution side. Okay. 4 of the jurors listens to the defense's case. 4 of the jurors listened to both the prosecution and the defense. Of those 3 groups of jurors, which one will be best equipped to make a reasonable evaluation and a ruling, right? To come up with the most reasonable finding. Clearly, the group that listened to both sides. We are told only listen to the prosecution, don't listen to the defense. I wouldn't listen to the prosecution. I wouldn't listen to the defense. I was involved in a case one time where that happened, and it was it was a administrative appeal. It wasn't legal. I mean, it wasn't a criminal case, but it was an administrative case where someone had a person had filed a complaint to the state of Maryland, and the administrative people responsible for looking at the case reviewed it, and they met with the defense and they denied it. And because they never listened to the plaintiff, it was then easy to appeal it then to before an administrative judge and get a finding, a proper finding. But basically it was absurd, and they didn't even realize it until we filed the appeal request, that our argument was going to be. And our argument was going to be, they were like, well, we talked to the other people and we decided, well, did you talk to the plaintiff? Did you talk to the complainant in that case? Did you talk to the complainant? No. So you had a hearing? No. And they said, we didn't have a hearing. Did you talk to the defendant, to the defense? Yes. Do you talk to the accused? Yes. And what do you call that? That was a hearing. You are the arbitrator and you talk to the accused. You had a session with the accused. That's called a hearing. You didn't include the plaintiff in your session with the accused. You had a hearing without the plaintiff. And then they came back and said, well, we want to have that hearing after all. We said, no, that ain't happening. We're appealing it up to an administrative judge. We appealed it up to an administrative judge and got a proper finding. So the bottom line is my point. That's a long way of saying, look, if you want to know what the hell's going on, I don't care what side you're on, you got to read what the Americans are saying, and you got to read TASS, and you got to read RT, and you got to read Sputnik, and you got to read Press TV, and you got to read Global Times, and you got to read all of these stuff, and you got to read people who are political analysts and stuff like that. And that's how you kind of figure this thing out. And so now here's what you know that you might not have known before. The position of the Russians when it comes to time is we don't give a damn about the time. We got time. You got the watches, we got the time. Why is it? Because the Russians perceive a threat to their nation. If you perceive a threat to your nation, to the very integrity of your nation, you ain't worried about the time. You got to keep going until that threat is no longer there. You have to be prepared to. If somebody attacks you, you don't just say, well, I'm going to fight for 2 minutes, and if I don't win in 2 minutes, I'll just let them stab me to death. No, you're not. You're going to fight to your last breath because you feel they intend to kill you, right? That's where Russia is. They ain't throwing in the towel anytime soon, ever. They have adjusted their economy over to a semi-war economy enough that they can continue to provide the necessary weaponry for their forces to continue to fight indefinitely. They're there for the long term. They feel that their national integrity is at stake. They ain't got no time clock. They ain't like, well, can we get done by this week? No. How about next week? No. They got a goal: demilitarization, denazification of Ukraine, and they're going to do what they got to do to accomplish that goal, and they ain't going to stop fighting until they accomplish it. Now let's look at what the other side might have to say, shall we? Shall we look at both sides? I say I want to look at both sides. We got to look at both sides. Politico. Ukraine can't take Crimea soon, Pentagon tells lawmakers in classified briefing. Oh boy, now they're brilliant, aren't they? Soon, as in within the next trillion years. So Ukraine is being encircled in one of the most important strategic towns on the front, Bakhmut. They're pumping soldiers and weapons in by the hundreds of thousands. Ukraine's basically soldiers they're snabbing these poor bastards, everybody out of their homes and bars and everywhere else, trying to run, hiding in basements and throwing them to the front, and they don't want to die. And they're like, well, we don't think we'll be able to take Crimea soon. Here's what's interesting too about that. This whole fantasy about taking Crimea. I got to say this. Taking Crimea this whole thing is a fraud and a fallacy. Let me explain why. In Ukraine, the electorate was somewhat split as far as pro-Russian, or at least not pro-West, and say not pro-Nazi, right? Not pro-West. So Zelensky won because he ran on a let me get rid of this until we get ready to talk, because this is important. Zelensky won because he ran on a pro-peace. So yeah, we're gonna make peace. And then after he got in, that was all a fraud. At some point, a guy named, I think it's Viktor Medvedev, who was the leader of the opposition party. There came a time when the opposition party was outpolling Zelensky. So if there was an election, Zelensky would lose. So as any good democracy would do, as any person who is in favor of a democracy would do, Zelensky had his opposition leader arrested and outlawed the opposition party, because in a democracy, that's just what you do. Now, let's keep something else in mind. In the eastern Ukraine area, in the Donbass area, the Lugansk, the Donetsk regions, right? These are pro-Russian people. They ain't voting for Zelensky's side, right? Crimea, to say they're pro-Russian, they're Russian, right? So in the event that Ukraine were to think about this, if Ukraine said, all right, we're bringing Donbass and Ukraine and Crimea back in, let's say that happened, and they said, and just as the United States said, we're going to be the perfect democracy and we're going to allow them to vote, you just brought in many millions of pro-Russians who will now be allowed to vote. And what's going to happen to Zelensky's people and his party? They are going to get smeared. They're going to get crushed. You will now have a Rada, which is their Congress, you might say, their parliament, whatever you want to say, which is going to be very, very strongly leaning to the pro-Russian and at minimum anti-Western sentiments. And Zelensky and his people can't allow that to happen. So the argument that they want the Donbass back, the Lugansk and the Donetsk People's Republic and Crimea, is a fraudulent argument in the first place. They can't bring them back in and let them vote, because if they do, the Nazis will all get voted out. They can't do that. So the whole thing's a fraud. Not to mention, you want to bring in, we're going to take back the Donbass and the Crimea, but the people there don't want to come back. That's democracy. We're going to go bring these people back in, but none of them want to come back. And let me add this, and you don't have the military firepower to do it. You'll be lucky not to get routed, which is not going to stop, because you're going to get routed. All right, let's get back to reading this political article, because it's critical to look at it and understand what the neocons, what crazy world they're living in. Ukrainian forces are unlikely to recapture Crimea from Russian troops in the near future, four senior defense officials told House Armed Services Committee lawmakers in a classified briefing. They didn't need a classified briefing to tell them that, but let's keep going on. The assessment is sure to frustrate leaders in Kiev. Now, this is propaganda, who consider taking the peninsula back one of their signature goals. Here's the thing about it. Somebody can say, I may not be able to date a supermodel, and that's one of my signature goals. And I mean, and somebody says, dude, you're 64 years old, you're overweight, you're bald, you got no hair, you're broke. Dude, you ain't getting a supermodel. Hey, I find that very troubling that you would tell me that. That's one of my signature goals. Again, we're talking about the difference between the information war and the artillery war. They're talking about goals. We're talking about the difference between Plato's reality and Aristotle's reality, the difference between the reality in which hot artillery lands in front of you and tears you apart, and the people in Kiev have signature goals, as if that's going to do. On paper, signature goals look great. Write it down. Give somebody a list of your signature goals. When you're sitting in front of when rounds of artillery are landing in front of you, those rounds don't care about your signature goals. Let's continue. It's unclear what led the briefers to that assessment. Yeah, who would imagine that? The fact that the Ukrainians are getting routed right now, that they're being destroyed and they've lost hundreds of thousands of people and they have no chance of winning, that couldn't have had anything to do with it. But the clear indication, as relayed by three people with direct knowledge of Thursday's briefing, is contents was that Pentagon doesn't believe Ukraine has or soon will have the ability to force Russian troops out of peninsula Moscow seized nearly a decade ago. What do you know? So a bunch of guys who are sitting in trenches getting as they lose village after village and town after town, these geniuses, these rocket scientists, have come to the conclusion that they're not going to be able to go on the offensive and take Crimea, probably one of the most heavily fortified areas on the face of this planet. They're losing town after town after town, and these people have come to the conclusion that they're not going to be able to go take Crimea. A fourth person said the briefing was more ambiguous. Yeah, well, they may be able to take it, but the point remained that Ukraine's victory in an offensive to retake the illegally annexed territory wasn't assured. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Again, the 64-year-old overweight guy who doesn't have a job, he's homeless, he lives in a box, and he babbles to himself because he's mentally ill and he has an alcohol problem. It's not assured that he's not going to be able to date a supermodel. He's a little smelly. Maybe he'll take a bath. Maybe she'll change her mind. Maybe she'll feel okay for him. It's not assured that he ain't getting a date with that supermodel, but it's a safe assumption. Let's keep going. The briefers, they tell us who the idiots are. We're not the kind of blah, 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 blah. In terms of Ukraine's ability to fight and take back sovereign territory, their remarkable performance in repulsing Russian aggressive, and by remarkable performance, you mean they're getting ripped apart by shrapnel. And continued adaptability on the battlefield speaks for itself. Yeah, it really does. Let's see. Jim Milley's there. I still maintain that for this year, or any other year, it would be very, very difficult to militarily eject the Russian forces from every inch of Ukraine. Now, they're losing village after village right now. They're going in the wrong direction. I think it is a safe assumption, and it ain't real difficult to look at that situation. What's going on? Well, they're losing village after village. I really don't think they're going to be able to go on the offensive and take one of the most heavily fortified areas in the world. These people are geniuses. That doesn't mean it can't happen. Doesn't mean it won't happen. But it'd be very, very difficult. That means that guy doesn't mean he can't get a date with a supermodel. Don't mean he won't get a date with a supermodel. But he is 64, balding, overweight, homeless, smelly, mentally ill, and broke. Those are some factors that may go against it, may not play well in his quest for a date with a supermodel. But I ain't saying it ain't gonna happen. I ain't saying it won't happen. But it's not gonna be easy for him. He's got a few hurdles, a few speed bumps he's got to get over before he gets that date with the woman on the cover of a Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. Russian forces have occupied Crimea, blah, 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 blah. One person familiar with the thinking in Kiev, or the lack thereof, the thinking in Kiev is, hey, man, how can we get paid? We got to sell this stuff and get paid. Listen to this. Said Zelensky administration was furious with Milley's remarks. Yeah, how dare you say we can't take Crimea? As Ukraine prepares for major offensives in the spring. And by prepare, what they mean is they're running for their lives, getting shelled with artillery, and losing town after town. I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of ways to prepare for a major offensive, but losing town after town doesn't seem to me, now I'm not a military strategist, but it doesn't seem to me that would be the best way to prepare for victory. I'm thinking if you're going to prepare for victory, you would want to hold the towns that you have and reinforce that stuff and bring more stuff so you could move forward. Going backwards and losing town after town, that's one way to prepare for a major spring offensive. I'm just saying probably not the most effective way, not the way I choose. But then again, I'm not a military strategist. I'm just a schmuck on YouTube. Speaking at the World Economic Forum, where if you're in the middle of a war, where else would you talk? Zelensky advisor Andriy Yermak rejected the idea of a Ukrainian victory without taking Crimea. There's a smart guy. Hey, man, if we can't take Crimea, we ain't winning. I think the Russians are good with that. This is absolutely unacceptable. Adding that victory means restoring Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, including Donbass and Crimea. Okay, all righty then, brother. Tell you what you do. You're going to probably have to turn things around a little bit before I believe you. You know, can you imagine you're standing on the side of the ring and you are, I don't know, a manager, boxing manager, and your guy, you're like, go get him, boy. Go knock him out. And old Rocky goes out in the middle and he gets mercilessly pummeled. He gets thrown on the ropes and he's just beaten like just beaten mercilessly. The guy punches him like he's punching a pillow for the entire round. He comes over to the side. Blood's running down his face. His ears look like cauliflowers, nose broken, 2 black eyes, missing teeth. And you're like, dude, things aren't looking good. How dare you? How dare you rain on my parade? I refuse to concede to this man. I'm far superior. I got him right where I want him. I'm wearing his hands out, punching me in the face. You realize how many times he's punched me at this point? He's going to punch me in the face till his arms fall off. And only then shall I have victory. And I will rejoice. Get out of here. You're getting pummeled mercilessly. That's Ukraine. I love this. They're rejecting the very idea. How dare you think we would win without taking Ukraine? Ye of little faith. This is absolutely unacceptable. Sounds like Bernie. It's unacceptable. Ukraine has repeatedly asked for longer-range weapons, including rocket artillery and guided munitions fired by fighter planes and drones to target Russian and command control centers and ammunition depots far behind the front lines in Crimea. And they say the Biden administration continues to refuse to send missiles for the launcher that can reach 300 miles, which would put all of Crimea at risk. The Russians already said, if you do that, we're taking another 300 miles. So that's up to you. Here's something to think about. Let's read this. It's a paragraph. Because sometimes you read something in an article and you think, maybe there's a little bit of reality here. House Armed Services Chair Mike Rogers, now that guy's a neocon extraordinary, said in an interview Wednesday that, now listen to this. Let's look at what Mike Rogers said. House Armed Services Chair Mike Rogers said in an interview Wednesday that the war needs to end this summer, placing urgency on the U.S. to rapidly supply Ukraine for a coming offensive and on Kiev to forge a clear outline of how the conflict ends. You hear what's going on, don't you? Hey, dude, man, we can go till this summer, but that's pretty much it. If you can't take back Crimea and the Donbass and all those places, wherever you're going to do, you can't do it by this summer. We got to throw in the towel. We fought all we can fight. Now, understand something. That shows panic and desperation because the U.S. knows what it means. They understand that a Russian victory means the end of U.S. hegemony. Let's go on. There's a school of thought that Crimea's got to be a part of it. Listen to what he says. Russia is never going to quit and give up Crimea, said Rogers, who did not address the contents of the classified briefing. Vladimir Putin has to decide when he can leave and what he can leave with and claim victory. He's correct. And Vladimir's telling you, this is what I can leave with and claim victory. The only problem is it ain't negotiable. He's not saying what he can leave with and claim victory. He's saying what he will leave with and claim victory. And here's the thing. The Ukrainians are losing fairly dramatically right now. They ain't in no position to dictate the terms to the Russians. You know, can you see it's at Appomattox? You think General Lee was walking up there? All right, guys, I'm here to claim victory. And you tell me what you can walk away with. The Union wasn't, like it wasn't like Abraham Lincoln called down there. Hey, guys, we got the Lee's troops surrounded and on the run. I'd like you to surrender to them. Give them everything they want. No, it's over because you lost. And when you lose, you don't dictate the terms. You accept the terms of the victor. Russians ain't going to come to you and they ain't going to negotiate. They've already said, we will impose our will on the battlefield. You want to do you if you want to win, if you want us to, they've said, in fact, what they're really saying is we're in no mood to negotiate at this point. We got them where we want to. And think about it. By the summer, what condition are the first of all, the Ukrainians are in no condition now to dictate terms. Trust me, it ain't getting better by the summer. They ain't turning things around by the summer. And so now the neocons are looking for a way out. Here's the problem. Well, let's keep going. We'll talk about the problem with that. What is doable? And I don't think that's agreed upon yet. Yeah, I don't think the Russians are going to agree. All right, here's what's doable: an unconditional surrender. So I think that there's going to have to be some pressure from our government and NATO leaders with Zelensky about what does victory look like. Think about that. I don't think that's agreed upon yet. Think about this sentence. I think there's going to have to be some pressure from our government and NATO leaders with Zelensky about what does victory look like. They are saying we're going to have to, this guy's kind of being a hardhead. He's saying we gotta have Ukraine, Crimea. We gotta have the Donbass. Give us more and more and more and more and more. Mike Rogers is saying, look, we're gonna have to make him an offer that he can't refuse. And you know what that looks like? Zelensky. You ever heard of a guy named Jeffrey Epstein? Just throwing that out there. You ever heard of a guy named Jeffrey Epstein? Yeah, he was our guy till he wasn't. Let me show you something. Let me show you something that you might find interesting. First of all, just something you might find interesting of how they do things. So just in case, Jeffrey Epstein was put in a cell with a man, just so you'll understand how they do things. When Jeffrey Epstein, how they negotiate with people. Jeffrey Epstein was put in a cell, and this is going to make sense. May not seem like it makes any sense to you right now, but maybe at some point it will. Jeffrey Epstein was their guy. Jeffrey Epstein was a guy who, let's face it, as we clearly understood, the man was working for intelligence and he ran a honeypot operation, right? You bring people in here, you get them in compromising positions, you get some videotape. We got the videotape, we own them, right? Things started getting a little heated. So Jeffrey Epstein went to jail and they put him in jail with a guy by the name of Nicholas Tartaglione. Now, Jeffrey Epstein gets in jail. Let me show you. It maybe this might have been something they did to help convince Jeffrey Epstein. With this guy. Let me see how I can do this. Let me give you a good picture of the guy. And I'm going somewhere with this. This is the guy. This is the guy. They put Jeffrey Epstein in a cell with this guy, a steroid monster named Nicholas Tartaglione, right? Something else you might want to know about Nicholas Tartaglione. We're going somewhere here. So he goes in a cell with this guy. And next thing you know, we read an article. And I'm going somewhere with this. Trust me, it's going to make sense. Jeffrey Epstein is on suicide watch after he was found semi-conscious in his jail cell, right? Epstein was found injured and semi-conscious in his jail cell after a possible suicide attempt or assault, right? According to sources, investigators questioned inmate Nicholas Tartaglione in relation to the occurrence. Tartaglione is a former Westchester County police officer who is accused of killing 4 men in 2016 as part of a cocaine distribution conspiracy. Right? Okay, you get it? They put Epstein in a cell with a mob hitman who had killed 4 people, who was roughly the size of France. And what do you know? He's found injured in the cell, almost like somebody, who knows who, beat the living hell out of him. Hey, we're going to put you in this cell with a mob hitman and go on about our business. Come back in a couple hours. Ooh, that's going to leave a mark. It's almost like somebody, maybe he injured himself or maybe he was assaulted. Hey, Nick, any idea what happened to him? Nah, he must have slipped on a banana peel and bumped his head repeatedly against the wall. Looks like he might have been kicked, elbowed, stomped on, slapped. I don't know. I have no idea. I didn't see nothing. Jeffrey, did you see nothing? Did you see anything? I didn't see anything. That's what I thought. They put Jeffrey Epstein in a cell. I'm just saying, if you're Zelensky, you might want to read up on what happened to their other guy, Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein was their guy, that they took care of him. They looked out for him. And when things started getting tight, they put him in a cell with Nicholas Tartaglione, a mob hitman who was in jail for a mob hit where he personally killed 4 people, and it wouldn't surprise me if he used his bare hands. Just saying. That's their old guy, Zelensky. That's how things work. And at some point, I'm sure Tartaglione had nothing to do with it. At some point in Jeffrey Epstein's unfortunate time in jail, the cameras weren't working. The guards fell asleep. I don't know. The lights went out. Who knows what happened? And during that period, Jeffrey Epstein decided that he couldn't live with himself for the crimes that he's committed. And strangely enough, he decided to vacate this mortal plane. Zelensky might want to read that story. He might want to look up Nicholas Tartaglione. They're saying to you, look, I've said all along, the U.S. government is a criminal enterprise. It's a mafia. Look, when somebody shot Kennedy, right? Guy supposedly shoots Kennedy. He goes to jail. What happens to him? A guy named Jack Rubenstein. They said his name was Jack Rubenstein. He was a mafia figure. He takes out the guy who supposedly killed Kennedy. What do you know about that? The mafia is involved again. I'm just saying, Zelensky. There may be another Nicholas Tartaglione. How about this? You remember the leader of Panama? He worked for the CIA. He was a big drug trafficker. He worked those two things kind of go together if you know a lot about the CIA. Eventually, he wasn't doing what they wanted him to do. Old Manuel Noriega, he wouldn't go along with everything they wanted. He became a criminal. They went into his country. They grabbed him. They brought him back here. They threw him in jail. They wouldn't let anybody talk to him. And if they had, he wouldn't have said anything, because guess what? There would have been a Nicholas Tartaglione in his cell. His cameras would have went out. The guards would have fallen asleep. You know how this story ends. All I'm saying is this. Let's wish poor old Zelensky the best. But I have a suspicion that if he don't listen well, do I have to show you? Let's look at this one more time. I got a suspicion that if Zelensky doesn't listen like he has to listen, he'll end up with a guy beside him in the prison who looks like that. Now, I ain't saying Tartaglione is all bad. He likes dogs. I like dogs. Dogs are nice. Look at that. He's got a cute little dog there. So is he all bad? Probably not. Maybe he's all right. I'm just saying that's what Zelensky's cellmate may possibly look like if when they say to him, all right, look, this thing's over, buddy. We've spent all we can spend. We've put in all the money we can put in. We just can't go any further. Here's what you're supposed to say. Here's what you're supposed to do. And if you don't, you gotta Nick, come on in here. Yeah. Want to introduce you to your new cellmate. Vladimir Zelensky, Nicholas Tartaglione. Nicholas Tartaglione, Vladimir Zelensky. Nick, yeah. We'll talk to you later. All right. Have a great day. Zelensky, yeah. What are you thinking, bro? I mean, you think we can work this thing out where you just claim victory or something, going about your business, go back hugging the Nazis over there, and we will all move forward and everything will be all right. I have a feeling you can go back to your gated community in Florida, just outside of Miami. Take your wife with you. She can spend $40,000. You ever been to Miami Beach? Oh my gosh, you can spend $40,000. Go down to Miami Beach, where all of the shops are. You can spend $40,000 in no time flat. His wife will love Miami Beach. Beautiful there. The Clevelander. That's my favorite. Club on Miami Beach. But lots of good places. You can drive out to the Keys. Sun's good all the time, all around. Nicholas Tartaglione won't be your cellmate. I mean, there are a lot of advantages, Zelensky, when they tell you it's time to retire to Miami Beach. My suggestion to you, you don't have to listen. I'd give up that fantasy about Crimea and the Donbass. I'd suggest that for you. Now, let's talk about this kind of an ending, but what that means. Because what that means is something that is critical. And here's why the people in the House would say yes. So here's what you got. You got a problem. The House of Representatives, they're looking at their next war. Mike Rogers is saying, but we got to go to war with China. We got to go to war with Russia. I'm tired of this war. This war is so old and boring. We need more wars. We got other wars here. This one's no fun. The Pentagon's like, dude, this ain't working well for us. We don't have the troops. We don't have the manpower. We can't go to war with Russia. We need out. We need out. We need out. We can't. This is going to end up real bad. We can't do it. But then you got the neocons. You got the psychopaths. You got the Kagan people, right? The Straussians. You've got Blinken and Winken and Nod. You know what I mean? The kooks, the real sociopaths here. The problem is this. They're in it for world domination. So here's the problem they have. They said to Russia, we will come to your border. We will surround you. We will intimidate you. And there's nothing you can do about it. And Russia said, you can come to our border, but you have to fight to stay there. No, we will not just, we're not going to resist. We're not going to resist because they're like, don't resist. The Russians like, resist. That's what you say to Iraq. That's what you say to Libya. We're Russia. We don't resist. We'll kick your ass out of town. Russia's like, you must think you're talking to Libya or Syria or somebody. Resist? No, that's not how we play in this part of town. We have developed a military that is quite capable of defending our border, and we will do it. Now get the hell off our border, or we're kicking your ass off. And the neocons are like, oh my gosh, well, now you have defied our world hegemony, and certainly there's nothing you can do. Resistance is futile. We're the Borg. We've come to your border. And Russians are like, all right, we tried to tell you. We tried to tell you, cuz we tried to told you. Now you wouldn't listen. Now we're going to have to kick your ass. We tried to say, get off our border. You want to be hard-headed? Well, now you're going to force me to kick your ass. I tried to tell you. But now you're forcing me. So now I'm going to commence to whipping your ass. So then Russia says, okay, go get them, boys. In they go. And the neocons are like, now we got you where you want to. We've got the Ukrainian military all ready to fight you. Go. And the Ukrainian military goes, and the Russians are beating the hell out of them. and they're going to win, and they're going to take everything. And so now the Ukrainians are living in, I mean, excuse me, the neocons have to revert to their dream world where they're really winning. And I don't care what's happening. We're just going to say we're winning. So they're caught up in this dream world, and they have to pretend that they're winning. And they're neocons. They don't know any better. They live in a dream world. Don't blame them. It's who they are. It's what they do. So now the only time the neocons lose is when they actually lose. So the Russians are like, have it your way. So as we'll call them the realists, but the people who are warmongers, but are waking up to some level of practical reality, are saying, let's find a soft landing. Neocons aren't for that, because there's no such thing as a soft landing, because this is the determination for the neocons. The neocons say to the world, everybody has to do what we want, or else we'll crush you. The Russians are doing opposite. The Russians are doing far worse than the opposite. They're putting their foot in their asses. They're saying to the neocons, not only are we not going to do it, we're going to put our foot in your ass. Now, see how you like that. So the neocons are like, oh, yeah, we'll show you. Now things ain't working out. Everything's falling apart. Their coalition's falling apart. Their buddies are telling them, what the hell are you doing? The economies of their allies are falling apart. Their economy, everything's going to hell. And the neocons would just say, well, we'll just pretend like everything's fine. So now what you have now is a dispute between the neocons and the State Department and in the executive branch, and the more realistic people, maybe in the Pentagon. Keep in mind something. It was the Pentagon that went to Congress, right? It was the military branch that went to Congress with some level of reality and said, hey, guys, yeah, this ain't going to work. Pentagon came forward and went to Congress and said, this ain't going to work. You know, they've already gone to the State Department. You know, they didn't just bypass. You know, they went to the State Department and said, guys, this ain't going to happen. This ain't flying. In the State Department, the neocons would say, we don't listen. Oh, come on, get out of here. You stupid grunts. And they're like, okay, we'll go to Congress. Congress, yeah, them idiots won't listen. This ain't working. It's going to go bad. So in the event that that Congress and the military says, look, we got to get out of this, there's going to be a infighting here. But meanwhile, the Russians ain't going to stop. And if the Russians are able to impose their will on that border, then that makes it clear to the world. American hegemony is over. At that point, let me say this. Is there any point in trying to fight China? Is there any point in confronting China? What's the point then? You become the laughing stock at that point. See, in order for the neocons to maintain an environment where they're going to confront China for world hegemony, they still have to have some semblance of credibility to make an argument for world hegemony. But if Russia's just kicked their ass off of Russia's border, that's a real weak argument. So at that point, they're like, we must stand up to China. And China's like, don't make me call Russia. You didn't kick your ass at once, okay? Don't make me call Putin back over here, okay? You coming over here woofing, shut up. I may call Putin. He kicked your ass once. Do you want to get your ass kicked the second time? Shut up. And at that point, Africa, the Middle East, they're sitting on the side laughing at you. Yes, we will stand up to China. And in the Middle East, Africa, they're like, man, you just got your ass kicked. And you talk about standing up to something. Shut up. At that point, it's over. Saudi Arabia, you're going to be like, Saudi Arabia, you must listen to us. Saudi Arabia is going to be like, yeah, right. Like I listen to people that just got their ass kicked. I don't think so. Go home, put some salt, put some Band-Aids on, put some alcohol on the wounds, but don't come around here woofing. Don't make me call Putin. That's what everybody's going to say. Everybody's going to say when the U.S. goes woofing in their neighborhood, hey, you better do what we're going to say. They're going to like, don't make me call Putin. Don't make me. Boo! Vladimir Putin. You'll be running. Their credibility as the world hegemony is, they put it all on the line in Ukraine. They can't lose. Now, they can just leave Afghanistan and say, we left because we won. People know that Afghanistan is not a threat. They have gone and built the, proxy army of all proxy armies. This is a big country. They loaded them down with stuff and they trained them for years and they planned and they did it all, but they did it on the border of a superpower. If you heard me once, you heard me 100 times. never go to war with a superpower on their border, because you ain't winning that one. So they came to Russia's border and they souped up this proxy army, and they sicked it on Russia. Not a good idea. Russia started off with an expeditionary force. That wasn't enough. So Russia's like, we're going to call timeout. Be back in a little bit. I'll be back in a few minutes. Timeout. We're going to dig in. We're going to hold you off. Give me a couple months. I'll be back. They went. They're getting hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They're getting tanks. They're getting everything. And now, meanwhile, they're still fighting and making their move, and they're starting to pour into the front line, and it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And it's going to get to a point where it's an irresistible force. And while they're doing this, the Ukrainians are just getting beat and pummeled and beat and pummeled. And at some point, they're going to be facing an overwhelming Russian army that ain't happy. They're going to be huge. They're going to be powerful. And they ain't going to be happy. And they're coming downhill, brother. They are coming downhill. And when that happens, now, again, I don't know that they decide to make some big blitzkrieg style offensive and overrun, or they put this huge force and they just lean on them. You know, let me tell you something about being lean on them. They just put this big force instead of an all-out attack. They put this force on them. And they just start firing, and they keep the fire, and they keep the artillery, and they keep moving forward with this gigantic, like a tidal wave, immovable force, right? Let me tell you, I played basketball in high school. I played basketball in junior college. I played basketball, played in leagues. Yeah, you might love to play basketball, right? Let me tell you something about basketball. The guy you got to chase around don't wear you out. You know what really wears you out if you ever played anybody ever played? Leaning on somebody who leans on you under the basket, somebody who gets under that low post game and leans and puts all their weight against you. Man, after about one quarter, your legs turn into jello. As long as you're running around, if you're in shape, you can run. But when a big guy just leans and puts that weight against you, I don't care what happens, he don't get any lighter. And your legs and your everything is holding this bastard up. And you're just like, after, before you know it, you're like, calling to the bench, somebody come, please get me. I can't hold this guy up any longer. He just leans on you and pushes you out of the lane, and you run around him and get back in the lane, and he leans on you and pushes you that way. A huge force leaning on you just wears you down. If the Russians do not choose to take this giant, powerful force and come downhill at them, if they just take this force and put the pressure on Ukrainian front lines and keep firing and artillery and inching forward, you ain't slowing this force up. So they don't have to do a gigantic move to come forward. They can put the pressure and hold that pressure, and the Ukrainians are going to crack. And then what? Nothing but open field behind them. They can keep going as far as they want. At that point, you're going to get some political collapse. And at some point, the Americans have to look up, and everybody around, and the Europeans, if nobody else, are going to say Americans. I don't know if you've been noticing what's happening lately, but we got days. They'll come to a point where they're going to say, we got days or hours. And they're going to call Putin. Here's what I predict. Whether it's as a result of a major offensive or heavy leaning on the troops, at some point, the NATO, the people, the Europeans are going to say to the Americans, man, we got days or hours. We better call Putin. And they're going to call Putin, and they're going to say, we want to talk. And Putin's going to say, about what? We need a deal. And Putin's going to say, remember last December when I sent you a list of my demands? Yeah, you got it. You got it. Before this war even started, the Russians sent a letter of issues. They sent a letter and they asked the United States and NATO for a written response. And the US just said, this is not something we're going to consider. So when they, and I predict they will, when they come to the United States and say, when they come to the Russians, when they call Putin, and they will, and say, look, man, we need to talk. Putin will say, no, we don't. Talk about what? Well, we need to talk about how we'll work this thing out. And the Russians are going to say, we don't need to. Do you need us to refax that letter to you, email it to you, possibly send it, tie it to a carrier pigeon? Tell us how you need us. If you lost it the first time, that's fine. We'll send it back to you. We have sent you a list of our requests. You don't need to call us. You need to respond to those requests. And when that happens, it's going to be a situation where the Europeans and the military are saying, dude, you got hours. You got days, if not hours. The lines are collapsing. At some point, they're going to be overrun, and we ain't far from it. Make a deal with Putin. And then they're going to start calling Putin and say, hey, man, how about this? You keep the Donbass, you keep Crimea, you go home. And Putin's going to say, hello, sorry, I can't hear it. He's going to ball up some paper like, he's doing static. Sorry, I can't hear you. Are you the guys who are not responding to the list of demands? He's going to ball them up. Wham! He's going to slam the door down, slam it down. Can't hear you. He's going to make it clear. You got my demands. No, I don't trust you guys. You got my demands. I ask, and they'll say, well, you demanded that we take our infrastructure off of your border everywhere. He's going to say, oh, you guys are real smart. You finally learned how to read, did you? They'll be like, we can't do that. He'll be like, oh, well, what'd you call me for? Wham! We're in the process. Sorry, like to talk to you, but we're in the process of overrunning all the Ukrainian positions right now. Perhaps when we get finished that, I'll have enough time to give you a buzz. Right now, don't have time to give you a buzz. We got Ukrainian positions to overrun. That is what's coming. Unless you live in the Kagan household and you're in some dream world where the Ukrainians are going to turn things around, come against the Russians, even though they're outnumbered 5-1, and they're going to defeat the Russians and go all the way to Crimea. They're going to surround Moscow, take Red Square. If you're in the Kagan family, then that's certainly an option. For the rest of us who live in the real world, the time will come, and it ain't going to be all that far, when Ukraine is on the verge of it's over. And then Zelensky's going to be on the phone saying to him, hey guys, what are you going to do? And meanwhile, if he talks to the Kagan family, they'll be like, what do you mean, dude? You guys are winning. He's going to be like, well, about that part where we're winning. Yeah, winning. Let's redefine winning and say, in a way, we're winning, but in this version of victory, all our positions get overrun and they're going to surround the capital soon. It's a form of winning, maybe not the form you're normally accustomed to, but it's the way we win. So could you help us out? And they ain't going to have nothing. You know why? Because all of NATO is demilitarizing. They're sending all their stuff. The Russians have created a trash compactor for NATO military gear. They've created a graveyard, and they're like, NATO, send more military gear and we'll blow it up. And NATO's sending it in at some point. Ain't gonna be nothing left. Germany's gonna be like, we got 3 tanks left. That's it to defend our country. And Americans gonna say, what do we care about? You send the damn tanks. Because America doesn't care about Germany. But then we won't be able to defend ourselves. And Americans gonna be like, yeah, oh man, we're worried about that. Oh, you can't defend you. Shut up. Send the tanks. Wham. And Joe Biden's going to send, Olaf Scholz is going to cry, but he'll send the tanks. He will cry. He will certainly cry, because that's the type of guy he is. He's a crying kind of guy. He's a Weasley crying little wimp, and he will cry like a Weasley little wimp. But he'll send the last 3 tanks because that's what he's told to do. And NATO will be sitting there. And then someone will say, I got an idea. Let's send in our troops. And they're going to be like, well, we could send in our troops, but they wouldn't really have like tanks or artillery because we already sent them all. How about guns? Yeah, guns. No, we don't have those either. We sent them to Ukraine. They've all been blown up. But I mean, we got like some steak knives, maybe. I don't know. Could we sharpen some sticks? It happened back in the Neanderthal days. Maybe we could charge the guys with sharp sticks or something. That's all we got left. We sent all of our military hardware to Ukraine, and the Russians blew it up. So things are working out well for the Russians in that Ukraine, who would have thought? Not only are they demilitarizing Ukraine, they are demilitarizing the entire, all of NATO. And the NATO is talking about, yes, Perhaps we should bring Ukraine into NATO. No, Ukraine is an impoverished, corrupt hellhole. Guys, you ain't bringing Ukraine into NATO. You ain't turning Ukraine into the EU. You have turned the EU into Ukraine. A corrupt, impoverished hellhole. That is what this thing has turned the EU into. Well, it's exposed it as the corruption that was already there. So that's that, guys. That's what I think about my time. Just one more quick look, just in case anybody thinks that Zelensky will say no. That will be his cellmate. And I don't think it'll work out well. I think when Zelensky gets introduced to his cellmate, who coincidentally was Jeffrey Epstein's cellmate, I think that'll be enough. I'll put it like that. Most people I know, if somebody said, Garland, we need you to come around. No, I'm not listening to you. Let me show you a picture. This is your cellmate. He's in jail for killing 4 people in a mob hit. I'd be like, yeah, what was that you guys wanted me to do again? Because you know when you get in there, you better not go to sleep, because you probably not wake up. You'll wake up, there'll be a belt around your neck, there'll be a noose around your neck, there'll be his friggin' arm around your neck, a pillow hold over your head. You go to sleep with this guy, yeah, it's going to be a long sleep. It will be the eternal sleep of everlasting peace. That's the kind of sleep this guy will give you, Zelensky. My suggestion is take the deal. All right, let's see. I'll end that. What's this? God help you who have transgressed against the people. That's right. If you transgressed against the people, you get a cell with Nicholas Tartaglione. All right. So let's go to the top. And we're going through the super chats because there are some, and there are people who have questions, and they don't want to end up in a cell with Nicholas Tartaglione. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. Tatiana, thanks a lot, Tatiana, for the super sticker. She is just absolutely wonderful. Thank you also for Joseph Curry. Thanks, Joseph. And VS, thank you, VS. Let's keep going. Oh, we got a question. Sparky, yay, Sparky. You know, I first heard of Sparky watching the Duran, and Sparky's always on the Duran. Sparky says, supposedly Epstein hanged himself with a paper t-shirt or a paper linen, but why didn't he just use the power cord on his CPAP machine? The machine was in the crime scene pictures. Oh, of course. Yeah, he did, man. He killed himself. I don't know. I guess he just felt like, you know, if he's going to kill himself, he's going to do it in the most strange and unrealistic way that he could come up with, huh? Well, I guess after old Nicholas Tartaglione beat the hell out of him a couple times, maybe he wasn't thinking clearly. Bruce Moore, thank you, Bruce Moore. Jay Matz, thank you, Jay Matz. Not people don't have a lot of questions so far today. Not a lot. Oh, here's someone. Was it common knowledge the U.S. was arming the Mujahideen against Russia in the 80s, and how does that compare to Ukraine? Yes, it was. In fact, not only were they arming the Mujahideen, let's not forget that Afghanistan was a very reasonable, stable society, and the United States supported crazy people. The one guy they supported had a habit of going around to places and throwing acid in women's faces because they didn't have their face covered. That's the kind of slime that we supported. The United States destabilized Afghanistan and turned it into a theocratic hellhole so that they could use it as a weapon against Russia. So this ain't the first time. I mean, this is par for the course. This is the way they do things. All right, let's look on Rockfin. I guess people got something to say on Rockfin. My friends on Rockfin. Take the deal, spin the wheel, advertise the government spiel. Yeah, that's exactly it. All right. Timothy says, Garland, I love your metaphors. They tend to be funny but true. Listening to you reminds me of all the great conversations I shared with my dad. He was incredibly wise. Dude, you rock. Keep up the great work. Thanks a lot, Timothy. Anything else? Username. What a great thing. What a great username. I love that. That's one of my favorite. Anybody else? No, that's it. All right, let's go. Golden Silence says, Garland, Ursula von der Stupid had her soldiers running around with broomsticks painted black when she was Germany's defense minister. Good job. Yeah, yeah. That's all they're going to have. That's what they're running. That's what they're getting down to. Black painted broomsticks. These people are friggin' idiots. All right. I think that's it, everybody. I think that is it. Well, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate everybody for being a part of another show. My God, I've been on over an hour again. How does this work? At any rate, wasn't Tartaglione sentenced to death? No. Oddly enough, Agrola says, no. In fact, there's been recent articles that said for some reason they dropped the death penalty. No reason why, but for some reason they decided not to go after the death penalty, almost like they worked out a deal with old Nick Tartaglione. Hey, we put you in the cell with Epstein. He commits suicide. We guarantee you won't get the death penalty for killing those 4 people. In fact, I'm betting old Nick Tartaglione he'll spend a couple years in one of those, one of those kind of prisons. What do they call it? Club fed. He'll spend a couple years in one of those prisons, and he'll be right back on the street where he was before. Well, he was probably working. It was a cocaine related mob hit. He was probably working for the CIA when I did. He's probably been working for them all along. Come on, cocaine trafficking, mob hits. Tell me that don't sound like the CIA. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. I am tired. I think we've done all the super chats. Thanks a lot, everybody over there on Rockfin. Well, and I'll finish up. You know the spiel. Anyone who can help with the channel, you see everything scrolling across the bottom. We got PayPal, Patreon. If you can do $1, $3, $5 a month, $100, $5 a month is good. A lot of people do $5 a month for Patreon. Helps keep the channel strong. If you can't, we got PayPal. And of course, if you think PayPal is a neoliberal hellhole, not saying it is or ain't, but if you do, buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee/GarlandNH. Don't ask me. I don't know why they put the H on. And of course, there's good old Cash App. And the last thing I'll say is Rockfin. You already know. Rockfin's great. It's like YouTube, only better because there's no advertisements. So in case they throw my ass off of YouTube at some point, you go to Rockfin, follow me, become on Rockfin. Costs nothing. You see all my stuff. However, there is an option on Rockfin because it is a free speech platform and it doesn't censor any speech and it doesn't have any advertisements. Of course, those guys got to eat too. They got to keep it on the air. So the option they do is this: you can become a Rockfin subscriber for $14.99 a month. But if you subscribe for a year, they give you a couple of months free, and it's only $9.99 a month. And subscribers, what you say to yourself, what benefit would that be? Well, all content creators on Rockfin, and everybody's there, do a subscriber only show per week. Mine is 9 o'clock Wednesday mornings, Eastern Standard Time, with Scott Ritter. That's the one I do. That is my subscriber only one. We are required to do it, and we do it, and we don't mind because it's great to have a place that doesn't do advertisements. It's great to have a place that doesn't do censor. So I always know if they throw me off of here, you know where to find me on Rockfin, and Rockfin is great. And there's a lot of good people in there, a lot of good stuff covered on there. So you'll really enjoy it. Don't just go watch me on Rockfin. Look around, man. You're going to find a lot of good people and good stuff on Rockfin that aren't anywhere else. So those are all the options. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'm out.